An atheist surgeon in Chicago's top hospital was performing emergency surgery on a dying child when he witnessed something that defied all medical explanation. What he saw in that operating room that night challenged everything he believed about science, faith, and the impossible, and changed his life forever. The fluorescent lights of Northwestern Memorial Hospital's or 7 cast their familiar harsh glow as Dr. Marcus Sullivan scrubbed his hands with a methodical precision that had defined his 15-year career as one of Chicago's most respected pediatric surgeons. It was 11:47 p.m. on a frigid February night in 2023, and what should have been a quiet Tuesday was about to become the most extraordinary night of his life. Marcus had built his reputation on cold, clinical excellence. At 45, he was the head of pediatric surgery at Northwestern, published in every major medical journal, and known throughout the Midwest for his ability to save children others had given up on. He was also, by his own proud admission, a committed atheist who viewed religious faith as nothing more than wishful thinking dressed up in ancient superstitions. Dr. Sullivan, incoming trauma in Bay 3, called out Sandra Martinez, the night shift nurse who had worked with Marcus for over a decade. 7-year-old Hispanic female, car accident, massive internal bleeding. ETA 3 minutes. Marcus dried his hands and headed toward the trauma bay, his mind already shifting into the analytical mode that had saved hundreds of young lives. He didn't believe in God, destiny, or divine intervention. He believed in surgical skill, medical technology, and the iron laws of biology. In his world, children lived or died based on the speed of ambulances, the quality of hospitals, and the competence of their doctors. Nothing more, nothing less. When the paramedics wheeled in 7-year-old Isabella Morales, Marcus knew immediately they were facing a nearly impossible case. The little girl had been trapped in a car for over an hour after a drunk driver slammed into her family's vehicle on the south side. Her vitals were barely detectable, her abdomen was distended from massive internal bleeding, and her skin had the waxy pallor that Marcus had learned to associate with impending death. "What do we know?" Marcus asked curtly, already examining the child as the trauma team transferred her to the surgical table. "Blunt force trauma to the abdomen, possible liver laceration, spleen rupture, probable internal hemorrhaging," reported Dr. Lisa Chen, the ER resident who had been treating Isabella since she arrived. "She's lost approximately 40% of her blood volume. Blood pressure dropping fast." Marcus lifted Isabella's eyelids and checked her pupils with his penlight. Fixed and dilated. Not a good sign. He palpated her abdomen and felt the telltale rigidity that indicated severe internal bleeding. "Where are the parents?" "Father died on impact," Sandra replied quietly. "Mother is in ICU with severe head trauma. Unconscious. The girl has no other family in the States. They're recent immigrants from Guatemala." Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came with these kinds of cases. A 7-year-old orphan fighting for her life with no one to hold her hand. It was the part of pediatric surgery that never got easier, no matter how many years he'd been doing it. "Okay, let's get her upstairs. Type and crossmatch for 6 units, call anesthesia, and prep or 7. We're going in." As they rushed Isabella to the operating room, Marcus caught a glimpse of something that struck him as oddly out of place. Clutched in the child's small hand was a small silver medal, some kind of religious pendant that had somehow survived the crash. One of the paramedics must have noticed it and made sure it stayed with her. "Should we remove the jewelry?" asked Janet Williams, the surgical tech who was preparing Isabella for surgery. Marcus paused for a moment, looking at the medal. Normally, he would have said yes immediately. Anything that wasn't medically necessary had no place in his or. But something about the way the child gripped it, even while unconscious, made him hesitate. "Leave it," he said finally. "If it's not interfering with the surgery, leave it." 20 minutes later, Marcus made his first incision into Isabella's abdomen. What he found inside was worse than even his experienced eye had anticipated. The child's liver had been virtually shredded by the impact. Her spleen was ruptured beyond repair. Internal bleeding was so severe that blood was pooling in her abdominal cavity faster than the suction could remove it. Most critically, the hepatic artery, the main blood vessel feeding the liver, had been completely severed. "Jesus," whispered Dr. Jennifer Park, the anesthesiologist monitoring Isabella's vitals. "How is she still alive?" Marcus didn't respond immediately. He was staring into the child's abdomen, his trained eye cataloging damage that should have killed her within minutes of the accident. According to everything he knew about trauma surgery, Isabella Morales should have been dead long before the ambulance reached the hospital. "Blood pressure dropping to 60/40, reported Jennifer. "Heart rate 140 and climbing. She's going into shock." "Get me more suction and 2 more units of O negative, Marcus ordered, his hands working quickly to clamp bleeding vessels. "And call Dr. Rodriguez from hepatic surgery. I'm going to need help with this liver reconstruction." For the next 2 hours, Marcus performed surgery that pushed the very limits of his considerable skill. He removed Isabella's destroyed spleen, repaired 3 separate tears in her small intestine, and began the painstaking process of reconstructing her liver. The hepatic artery repair alone should have been impossible. The vessel was so damaged that there was barely enough healthy tissue to work with. But somehow, impossibly, every suture held. Every repair that should have failed succeeded. Every bleeding vessel that should have been irreparable responded to treatment. "I've never seen anything like this," muttered Dr. Carlos Rodriguez, the hepatic specialist who had arrived to assist with the liver reconstruction. "The tissue is responding like she's a healthy patient, not someone who's lost half her blood volume." Marcus was thinking the same thing, but he pushed the thoughts aside. Unusual cases happened. Sometimes patients defied medical expectations. There was always a rational explanation, even if it wasn't immediately apparent. It was at 3:17 a.m., exactly when Marcus was suturing the final repair to Isabella's hepatic artery, that he saw her. Standing in the corner of the operating room, partially obscured by the shadows cast by the surgical lights, was a woman Marcus had never seen before. She wore a blue gown that seemed to shimmer under the harsh fluorescent lighting, and her hands were clasped in prayer. Her face was gentle but sorrowful, and her eyes were fixed intently on the small child lying on the operating table. "Who let someone into my or?" Marcus snapped, not looking up from his delicate suturing. "Sandra, get security up here and get this person out immediately." "Dr. Sullivan?" Sandra looked confused. "There's no one here except the surgical team." Marcus glanced up sharply. The corner where he had clearly seen the woman was empty. Just shadows and medical equipment. Marcus shook his head and returned to his suturing. "Never mind. I thought I saw someone." But even as he focused on the surgery, Marcus could swear he felt a presence in the room, something calm and protective that seemed to hover over Isabella's small form. "Blood pressure stabilizing at 90/60, reported Jennifer, sounding surprised. "Heart rate down to 110. Her color is improving." Marcus finished the arterial repair and began closing Isabella's abdomen. As he worked, he found himself glancing repeatedly at the corner where he thought he'd seen the woman. Each time, he saw nothing but empty space. But the feeling of presence remained, so strong it was almost tangible. "This is remarkable," said Dr. Rodriguez as they prepared to close the final layer of incision. "Her liver function is already showing signs of improvement. In a trauma this severe, we usually see organ failure, not recovery." Marcus nodded, but his attention was drawn to something else entirely. The silver medal that Isabella had been clutching when she arrived was now resting on her chest, somehow having worked its way out from under the surgical drapes. In the bright lights of the ore, Marcus could clearly see what it depicted: a woman in a blue robe, her hands pressed together in prayer, surrounded by rays of light. Our Lady of Guadalupe. Marcus recognized the image from his childhood in predominantly Mexican neighborhoods on Chicago's west side. He'd seen similar medals and images countless times, though he'd never paid them much attention. To him, they were just cultural artifacts with no more significance than any other piece of jewelry. But now, looking at the medal resting on Isabella's chest as her vital signs continued to stabilize impossibly, Marcus felt something he'd never experienced in 15 years of surgery: doubt about the absolute supremacy of medical science. "Final suture in place," he announced as he completed the closure. "Let's get her to recovery." As the surgical team prepared to transfer Isabella to the post-operative recovery unit, Marcus remained by her side, ostensibly checking her vitals but actually staring at the small silver medal that rose and fell with each of her increasingly steady breaths. Isabella Morales should have died on the operating table. Every medical textbook, every case study, every bit of training Marcus had received told him that the damage he'd found inside her small body was incompatible with life. The hepatic artery repair alone should have failed. The tissue was too damaged, the blood loss too severe, the surgical conditions too challenging. Yet here she was, not just alive, but showing signs of recovery that defied medical explanation. "Dr. Sullivan?" Sandra touched his arm gently. "Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." Marcus almost laughed at the choice of words. Had he seen a ghost? A hallucination brought on by surgical fatigue? Or something else entirely? "I'm fine," he said automatically. "Just tired. It's been a long night." But as they wheeled Isabella toward recovery, Marcus found himself walking beside her gurney instead of heading to his office to complete his surgical notes as he normally would. Something about this case felt different. Something about this child demanded his continued attention in a way that had nothing to do with medical protocol. In the recovery room, as Isabella lay sedated but stable under the watchful eyes of the nursing staff, Marcus pulled up a chair beside her bed. He told himself he was just monitoring a complex post-surgical case, but deep down he knew that wasn't entirely true. He was trying to understand what had happened in or 7. He was trying to rationalize the impossible recovery, the inexplicable surgical success, and most disturbingly, the woman in blue he was certain he had seen standing in the corner of his operating room. Marcus Sullivan had built his entire career on the foundation of scientific materialism. He believed that consciousness was nothing more than brain chemistry, that death was simply the cessation of biological functions, and that everything in the universe could eventually be explained through careful observation and rational analysis. But sitting in that dimly lit recovery room, watching a 7-year-old girl breathe steadily after surgery that should have been impossible, Marcus felt the first crack in the foundation of everything he thought he knew about the world. As dawn broke over Chicago, casting pale winter light through the recovery room windows, Marcus was still sitting beside Isabella's bed, holding the small silver medal in his hand and wondering if 15 years of scientific certainty had just been shattered by something he couldn't explain, couldn't quantify, and couldn't dismiss. The rational part of his mind insisted there had to be a medical explanation. Unusual cases happened. Sometimes patients surprised everyone with their resilience. But another part of his mind, a part he'd spent decades suppressing, whispered something different. What if some miracles really are miraculous? Isabella Morales opened her eyes at 6:23 a.m., exactly 8 hours and 36 minutes after Dr. Marcus Sullivan had closed the final suture on what should have been an impossible surgery. Marcus was still sitting beside her bed, the silver medal of Our Lady of Guadalupe resting in his palm, when her small voice broke through the quiet hum of the recovery room monitors. "Donde está mi mama?" she whispered in Spanish, her dark eyes scanning the unfamiliar room with the confusion of a child waking up in a place that wasn't home. Marcus had learned enough Spanish during his residency at Cook County Hospital to understand the basic question. "Where is my mother?" It was the first thing every child asked when they woke up after surgery, and it was always the hardest question to answer. "Isabella," he said softly, placing the medal gently on her chest where she could see it. "I'm Dr. Sullivan. You were in an accident, but you're safe now. You're in the hospital." Her small hand immediately went to the medal, clutching it with the same fierce grip he'd noticed when she first arrived. "Está bien mi mama? Why, Papa?" Marcus felt his throat tighten. Even after 15 years of pediatric surgery, telling a child that their parents were gone never got easier. But before he could figure out how to explain the unexplainable to a 7-year-old, Isabella's attention was drawn to something else entirely. She was staring at a point just over Marcus's left shoulder, her eyes wide with what looked like recognition rather than fear. "Virgin Maria," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "Sabía que vendrías." Marcus turned to look where Isabella was staring, but saw nothing except the standard recovery room equipment and the pale morning light filtering through the windows. Yet Isabella was clearly seeing something, or someone, that brought her comfort rather than confusion. "Isabella," Marcus said gently, "what do you see?" "La Virgin," she replied simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "She told me she would stay with me until you fixed me. She said you have very good hands, but that you don't believe in her yet." A chill ran down Marcus's spine. The child was describing exactly what he thought he'd seen in the operating room, a woman in blue, watching over the surgery with protective care. But more unsettling was Isabella's claim that this figure had specifically mentioned his own lack of belief. "Isabella, when did you see this woman?" "During the surgery. She held my hand when it hurt. She said her name is Guadalupe, and that she takes care of children who are far from home." Marcus stared at the child, his scientific mind racing to find rational explanations. Hallucinations during surgery were possible, especially with the anesthetics involved. Children often had vivid dreams during recovery. There had to be a medical explanation for what Isabella was describing. But the specificity of her account, the mention of his surgical skill combined with his disbelief, the reference to being far from home, made his rational explanations feel increasingly hollow. "Dr. Sullivan," Janet Williams, the head recovery nurse, approached with Isabella's morning labs. "These results are unusual." Marcus took the lab report, expecting to see the kind of numbers typical for a child recovering from massive trauma surgery. What he found instead defied every expectation. Isabella's liver function tests were completely normal. Her blood count showed perfect levels despite the massive transfusions. Most remarkably, her inflammatory markers, which should have been sky-high after such extensive surgery, were barely elevated. "These numbers look like they're from a healthy child who's never been sick," Janet said, echoing Marcus's own thoughts. "I've triple-checked them. The lab ran them twice to make sure there wasn't an error." Marcus studied the results more carefully. In 15 years of pediatric surgery, he'd never seen post-operative labs like these. Children recovering from major trauma surgery typically showed elevated liver enzymes, abnormal blood chemistry, and significant inflammatory responses for weeks after surgery. Isabella's numbers suggested her body was healing at an unprecedented rate. "Run them again," he said finally, "and order a complete metabolic panel. I want to see everything." As Janet went to order the additional tests, Marcus turned back to Isabella. who was now sitting up in bed with an alertness that should have been impossible given her condition just hours earlier. "Dr. Sullivan," she said in careful English, "Guadalupe says you're scared." "Scared of what?" "Scared that what you saw was real. But she says it's okay to be scared. She says that's how faith starts, with being scared that maybe everything you thought you knew wasn't right." Marcus felt his hands begin to tremble slightly. No 7-year-old should be capable of such philosophical insight, especially not one who had just undergone massive trauma surgery. Yet here was Isabella, speaking with a clarity and wisdom that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her years. "Isabella, where did you learn to say things like that?" "I didn't learn it. Guadalupe is telling me." She pointed again to the empty space over Marcus's shoulder. "She's still here. She says you helped save my life, but that she helped save yours too." Before Marcus could respond, his pager buzzed with an emergency call. Another trauma was coming in, a 16-year-old boy who had been shot in a gang shooting on the South Side. Marcus's rational, professional mind seized on the interruption as an escape from a conversation that was challenging everything he thought he understood about reality. "I have to go, Isabella. The nurses will take good care of you." As he headed toward the door, Isabella called after him. "Dr. Sullivan, Guadalupe says you'll understand soon. She says sometimes doctors need miracles too." Marcus paused at the doorway, looking back at the small girl who somehow seemed to be carrying on a conversation with someone only she could see. Then he forced himself to walk away, toward the familiar territory of medical emergency where science ruled and miracles were just unexplained phenomena waiting for rational explanation. But over the next 3 days, as Isabella's recovery continued to defy every medical expectation, Marcus found it increasingly difficult to maintain his scientific skepticism. Isabella was released from the hospital after only 4 days, a recovery time that should have been impossible given the extent of her injuries. Her follow-up scans showed perfect healing with no signs of surgical complications. Most remarkably, her liver had regenerated tissue at a rate that medical literature suggested was impossible in pediatric patients. Dr. Rodriguez, the hepatic specialist, was so stunned by Isabella's recovery that he requested permission to write up her case for publication in the New England Journal of Medicine. "I've never seen anything like it," he told Marcus as they reviewed Isabella's final scans. "The liver regeneration alone is unprecedented. We're talking about tissue recovery that would normally take months happening in a matter of days." Marcus nodded, but his attention was focused on something else entirely. In every post-operative photo they'd taken of Isabella, the small silver medal of Our Lady of Guadalupe was visible, resting on her chest like a badge of inexplicable grace. On the day of Isabella's discharge, Marcus found himself drawn once again to her room. She was sitting up in bed, coloring in a book that one of the nurses had brought her, when he knocked on the doorframe. "Dr. Sullivan," she smiled brightly. "Guadalupe said you would come say goodbye. How are you feeling, Isabella?" "Perfect. Guadalupe fixed everything that was broken." She held up her coloring book to show him a picture she'd been working on, a woman in a blue robe standing in a hospital room, her hands outstretched over a child lying on an operating table. "Isabella, did someone help you draw this?" "No, I drew what I saw." "That's you," she pointed to a figure in surgical scrubs. "And that's me on the table, and that's Guadalupe taking care of both of us." Marcus stared at the drawing. Despite being created by a 7-year-old with crayons, it captured the scene from or 7 with startling accuracy, including details that Isabella shouldn't have been able to observe while under anesthesia. "Isabella, I need to ask you something important. During your surgery, when you saw this woman, Guadalupe, did she say anything specific about me?" Isabella set down her crayons and looked at Marcus with the serious expression children sometimes get when they're trying to explain something adults don't understand. She said, "You're a very good doctor, but that you've forgotten how to believe in things you can't see." She said that's why she chose you to save me, because you needed to remember that some things are real even when science can't explain them. And she specifically said her name was Guadalupe? See. She said she's the mother who takes care of all children, but especially the ones who are far from home and scared. Like me. Isabella's voice got smaller. She also said that Mama and Papa are with her now, and that they're not hurt anymore. Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes, something that hadn't happened in his operating room or recovery ward in over a decade. This child had lost everything. Yet somehow she radiated a peace and acceptance that Marcus, with all his education and success, had never achieved. "Dr. Sullivan," Isabella continued, "Guadalupe wants to know if you'll take care of her medal when I'm not here anymore." "Where are you going?" "Social Services is placing you with a foster family here in Chicago." "No, I mean when I grow up and don't need her medal anymore." "She says you're going to need it more than me." Isabella removed the silver medal from around her neck and held it out to Marcus. "She says this will help you remember that what happened in the surgery room was real." Marcus hesitated. Accepting the medal felt like crossing a line he'd spent his entire adult life defending, the line between rational skepticism and religious belief. But looking at Isabella's trusting face, thinking about her impossible recovery, remembering the woman in blue he was certain he'd seen in or 7, Marcus found himself reaching out to take the small silver pendant. The moment the medal touched his palm, Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, the same sensation of presence he'd experienced during Isabella's surgery, but stronger and more personal. It wasn't a vision or a voice, but rather a profound sense of being known and accepted by something infinitely larger and more loving than anything his scientific worldview had room for. "Thank you, Isabella. Guadalupe says you're welcome. And she says you don't have to be scared anymore. She says believing doesn't make you less smart, it just makes you more open to all the ways love shows up in the world." That evening, Marcus sat in his downtown Chicago apartment, holding Isabella's medal and staring out at the city lights. For the first time in his adult life, he found himself praying, not to any specific deity, but to whatever force had guided his hands during that impossible surgery and brought healing to a child who should have died. 3 months later, Marcus began volunteering at a free clinic in Pilsen, Chicago's predominantly Mexican neighborhood, where images of Our Lady of Guadalupe adorned every wall, and her feast day was celebrated with parades and flowers and prayers offered in languages of the heart that transcended the limitations of science. 6 months after Isabella's surgery, Marcus attended his first Mass in over 20 years at Our Lady of Guadalupe Church on 19th Street. He didn't convert to Catholicism immediately. His journey toward faith was gradual and filled with questions. But he began to understand that belief and knowledge weren't opposites, but rather different ways of approaching the mystery of existence. A year later, Dr. Marcus Sullivan established the Isabella Miraculous Foundation, providing free surgical care for immigrant children who couldn't afford treatment at major hospitals. The foundation's logo featured the image from Isabella's crayon drawing, a woman in blue watching over a surgical scene with hands extended in blessing. Isabella, now 8 and thriving in her foster home, remained in contact with Marcus. She continued to speak matter-of-factly about her conversations with Guadalupe, and Marcus stopped trying to find scientific explanations for her experiences. Some mysteries he had learned were more meaningful when left unexplained. Dr. Carlos Rodriguez eventually published Isabella's case in the New England Journal of Medicine under the title, "Unprecedented Hepatic Regeneration Following Massive Pediatric Trauma." The paper became one of the most cited articles in trauma surgery literature, not because it provided answers, but because it documented something that medical science couldn't fully explain. Marcus kept the conclusion of the paper simple. While the mechanisms underlying this patient's remarkable recovery remain unclear, the case serves as a reminder that healing involves factors that extend beyond our current understanding of human physiology. He never mentioned Our Lady of Guadalupe in the scientific paper, but he never forgot her presence in or 7 that February night. Today, Dr. Marcus Sullivan continues to practice pediatric surgery at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, but his approach to medicine has fundamentally changed. He still relies on scientific training and technological expertise, but he also acknowledges the role of factors that can't be measured in lab results or captured in medical imaging. The silver medal of Our Lady of Guadalupe hangs from a chain around his neck, hidden beneath his surgical scrubs but always present during operations. Colleagues have noticed that his surgical outcomes have improved since the Isabella Morales case, though none can explain exactly why. Marcus himself believes he knows the reason. He learned to work with hands guided not just by medical training, but by a love that transcends the boundaries between science and faith, between the possible and the miraculous. And sometimes, in the most challenging surgeries, when young lives hang in the balance, Marcus swears he can feel a presence in the operating room. Someone watching over both doctor and patient with the protective love of a mother who never abandons her children, no matter how far they've wandered from home. Because some miracles happen not to prove that God exists, but to remind us that love is the most powerful force in any operating room, any hospital, any corner of the world where healing is needed. And there you have it. This incredible story of divine intervention in modern medicine touched your heart, didn't it? Dr. Sullivan proved that even the most skeptical scientists can encounter the Virgin Mary's power in the most unexpected places, right? If you were moved by this real testimony of how an atheist surgeon witnessed Our Lady of Guadalupe in his operating room during an impossible surgery that saved a dying child's life, hit that like button below. It really helps me continue sharing these stories that show how Mary's love transcends even scientific skepticism. If you're not subscribed yet, subscribe now and hit that notification bell. Every week there's a new testimony that will renew your faith that the Virgin Mary works miracles in hospitals, operating rooms, and medical facilities around the world. And don't forget to check out our store in the first pinned comment. We have amazing Christian products, including the 365-day Devotional, perfect for strengthening your relationship with Jesus and understanding Mary's role as intercessor for healing. Tell us in the comments, have you ever witnessed something medically inexplicable? Do you believe the Virgin Mary can work miracles through doctors and modern medicine? And if you also believe in Mary's power to heal through divine intervention, write, Mary heals through doctors. Declare your faith in her medical miracles. Share this video with medical professionals, with those facing health crises, with anyone who struggles to reconcile science and faith, with those who need to know that Our Lady works through human hands to bring supernatural healing. Thanks for watching until the end. May the Virgin Mary bless your health and guide the hands of every doctor who cares for you. See you in the next testimony.